I first saw, when I first joined this club, Chuck Dollar was the president, and that was the first demo I saw. He did these trees. And the only thing I really wanted to change is he did all his embellishing off the lathe, colors and everything. So this document is on the website if anybody wants to refer to it. And so this was tree number 1. And I kind of progressed through, started doing some texture, cat likes thing in 3s. So, and this, when your wife gets a hold of a tree, that's what it looks like. And if you want to waste too much time on a tree, this is pyro carved. That one's out of cherry. It's a little easier to burn with a wood burner. So, and this is what we're going to be shooting for today. And I'm more of a visual person, so I just lay this out kind of in the steps I do, so you're welcome to take photos of it. And some of the supplies I use are here. So let's get started. A lot of ways to find center on pieces. I've done a lot of these with the 3D printer, handed out a ton of those. Dennis wanted me to show you this. I was at the fair, and if you don't have a center finder, you can just use your thumbnail, and then you can find the center pretty easy there. So just another way to do it. This is hard maple. It's 8/4, roughly 5 inches long. When I turn between centers, I use a cup drive. Some people call them safety drives. I'm lazy, I don't like taking the chuck off, so. I'm not going to talk a lot about safety. The only thing I don't agree with that paper, it says safety glasses. I really think you should wear a safety shield, because this piece spinning at 2,000 hitch in the face is definitely going to hurt. My wife says I'm already ugly enough, so don't need any more. Dents and bruises. And I don't mind hecklers. The only rule I have is if you heckle me, you have to do the next demo. So, yeah. Spindle roughing gouge. Doesn't have to have this long a handle, but it's the only handle I have that'll fit a 3/4 inch. So, and only use a spindle roughing gouge when the grain is in the direction of the lathe bed. Never use it on a bowl blank. I was just at Mark Adams, and there was a master woodworker turning behind me. I turned around, and he's using a spindle roughing gouge on a bowl blank. So we stopped the class in a hurry and had a little lesson. But so just be careful with that. I like to have 3 points of contact with a tool, one here, and then I use my hip to move the tool. I try and get away from moving it with just my hands if I can. And a lot of people want to scrape, so we're going to do the anchor bevel cut. So we find our anchor. There's the bevel. And I think beginners, it's good just to go one direction. I'm going to use a bidan to establish the tenon. This chuck I need a slight dovetail, so I'll tip it at the end. There are a lot of ways to make tenons. A good thing to do is check across and make sure that's completely flat or just very slightly concave. You can scrape tenons in, you can cut them. This was actually at ground, so I could scrape a tenon in for like a Vic Mark chuck. You can turn them in with a spindle gouge. I'm going to use a tail center as long as I can. And a tip for people with arthritis in their hands. If those T-handles are too much, you can use a regular Allen wrench. If I knew a wood turner, they'd put a nice handle on there. But it's just, I've turned with some people that it really bothers their hand to use that T-wrench. So now I'm just going for a round cylinder. If you touch your wood while it's spinning, always touch it on the back side. There was a guy in one of our clubs that was still more square. He was in a hurry and he turned around like this, dropped his hand 3 fingers right down between the tool rests, almost degloved him. And he said, the doctor said if he would have had a ring on, would have lost his finger. And you can get a really nice finish with a spindle gouge. Just roll it up on an edge you haven't used yet. And it's almost a skew-like cut. So this is a template. Chuck made kind of a template too. This distance here is a rough length of my blank. And if I have an odd piece of stock, I rarely use this, but if I do need I just don't really want it any bigger than that diameter. And this is going to be this notch here is going to be the length of the taper I'm going to do. I'm going to run from this diameter down to roughly 3/16 to 1/8. And the first hands-on class I took here was with Jimmy Clues. And he walked over while I was turning, and he covered the end of my tool with his hand. And he says, don't be looking at that tool, look at the horizon. He said, that tool won't do anything you don't want it to do. So that's what I'm doing when I cut these tapers. I'm looking at the horizon. It doesn't have to be perfect either, it's a tree. So that's about all I can use the tailstock. And this point on here is actually a Cindy Drozda point. Just has a really small point on it. You don't have to have one, it just gives me a little more room to work there. I have notches in here, and that's what's marked off 3/8, 3/4, 3/4. So let me give this to Cat. You want to hand that to Cat, please? Hopefully I won't need that anymore. Now I'm going to cut the valves of the tree in. You can use a skew. You can use a spindle gouge. This is just that kind of pointed scraper. And when you use a traditional scraper, and I'm only there's a point there, but I'm only cutting on one side of the tool. I'm just pressing it one direction. You don't want to drive it in and have both sides cut. Next, I'm going to use a spindle gouge to do some of the shaping. This is a Cindy Drozda. It's a deep flute 3/8 spindle gouge. And I've actually ground it so it has the radius of a 1/4 inch spindle gouge. But I have all the strength of a 3/8. But you can use a standard 3/8 spindle gouge, work fine too. Use a skew, whatever works. I want a really sharp transition in there. That's one reason I use this really, like this point on this wouldn't be good for rolling big beads or anything, but for fine detail work it works really well. So. And I've screwed these trees up every way you can imagine, so if you ruin one, it's probably not anything new to be done. 'Cause I've probably already done it. And step back and look at them. This looks a little long compared to this one, so I'll shorten it just a little bit. I touch it a lot, but you'd be surprised what little imperfections you can feel. And you can play around with different shapes on the top too. Now I'm going to do a rough shaping of the trunk and the base. And again, this is the badan. I call it an English badan. I took a class from a Frenchman. His badan was square, and he uses it in this orientation, which was scary. But he could roll beads like none other. And just, but this is a bevel writing cut. It's actually just a peeling cut. I usually go 1.5 width. And it's kind of like just peeling an apple. That's what you're after. You want to write that bevel. Now I'm going to clean up the bottom of the tree just a little bit. And this is where it's real easy to skate. So I want my flute pointed right at 9 o'clock. If I'm over here a little bit, I'm going to go right up the tree and we're going to have a new shape. And I do turn left-handed some because Steve Sinner was one of my early mentors and he's left-handed. And sometimes it was easier just to do it the way he did it than try and figure out how to do it the right way. Or different, right-handed, so. Now it's time to put some texture on. This is a Sorby mini micro, or they call it micro, I guess, spiral texturing. And this is the big version of it. And when you get these, they'll have a saddle on them. And if you wanted to make, I'm kind of reviewing John's demo, but if you wanted to make a spiral, you would run this there, and there's probably 6 to 8 cuts to make that spiral. The only downside to this is it has to be a straight cylinder. You can't run a spiral up down a concave or over convex very easy. So, but this tool is one you need to oil. This is just a little drop oiler. And you'd be surprised how many people I go help them turn. And it squeals and vibrates. And did you ever oil it? You have to oil it? So, yes, you do have to oil it. And here I want to do this on center. Now I don't run the saddle on this because I do just a lot of freehand texturing. And this one we're going to have to slow it down maybe 400 or so. But that's why I left all this wood behind it there, because I'm pressing on it fairly hard. So, I'll lower this just a little bit. So I'm on center. I'm going to tilt it over roughly 1 o'clock. And you have to give this tool a little time to work. I don't know how well that'll show on the camera. This probably isn't necessary. I try to put a little texture on the end. That it's actually pretty small. This is a chatter tool. It's probably a little small to chatter, but sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. A lot of speed, a lot of overhang. When it's squealing, it's working. not many people bring their own shavings, but now I'm going to burnish this with shavings. But I didn't know if Dennis was going to be here at the fair. He's usually sweeping these up as you're turning. So sometimes where'd all the shavings go? And then if you feel something else down by your ankle, it's usually the shackle and chain where they got you chained to the lathe. So that we have a good time at the fair. No, they do have to keep the booth clean. This, just make sure you have plenty of shavings. If not, you have 3 kind of burned in lines in your hand. But that just takes some of that rough texture off. It's easier on the pins. So far as I'm going to mark it now, because if I take it to final shape and it starts to wobble, it's too hard to run it with the markers. You can use any marker you like. Sharpies are fine, but they don't give a lot of different color options. And like when you get to the fair or different places, art shows, women will come up, I want coral, I want teal. Last year I had one wanted dusty rose, and I don't even know what dusty rose is. But guys, they come up, I want green, I want red, you know. So they're pretty simple. But so when you get into the higher end markers, these are Tombos. You have like 6 choices of blues, greens, all that. And then these are Faber-Castell. These are India ink. So if you're concerned about the color fading, these are alcohol based and they will fade after time. And these are a little more color fast. They're even rated on the tube, their color fastness. So whatever, I buy these online, they're up on sale. They're usually $3 a piece. Blick Art for the Tombos. This is the #1 color choice for kids. So I'm probably not too many kids here today, but. And you don't have to color it. This is just something I did. I kind of wanted to make it my own with the texture and the color. And Chuck was doing all his color off the lathe. And it's kind of cool when you walk in a room and if there's 50 trees, I can usually pick mine out. So. Early ones I used really wide bands on. It's personal taste. And the nicest thing if the people can pick the 3 colors out. I got into a deal last fall. Cat said, I wanted you to make a few trees for friends. The first list had 32 trees on it. And that wasn't the final list. So. And these are brush tip markers I'm using. Hope my helmet's not in the way. My eyesight's not that great, so I gotta get pretty close. My hearing's even worse. So. My hearing aids have 2 settings. TV, off, and wife. Off and wife are the same setting. I always get up in the morning, she goes, you got your ears in? And I go to a lot of symposiums, and another guy I go with from Lamont, Iowa, he says I'm the best roommate because I take my hearing aids out at night. I don't hear anything, so. Next step is we're going to use carnauba wax to kind of seal down the colors. And like the bio buffing system, if you've ever dropped one of those wax bars on the cement, you get all these little pieces. So to start with, I usually cut my bar into thirds just so I'm not sacrificing a whole bar. But so anyway, I get a lot of wax for this kind of stuff. It just kind of seals things up a little bit, gives it a little bit of sheen. And the next thing is the cut off fish hook. I put a few examples there, and then I get little beads at Hobby Lobby, and that. And when you cut these hooks off, they will fly clear across the shop. So I cut them over my trash can, so never come over and dig through my trash can, because you'll come out with a handful of fish hooks. So when you cut that off, it actually leaves like a little chisel point, which is a really good drill. And then I like to drive in the last little bit. All tools are hammers, right? So the only thing is you don't want to drive too far because you'll split the bead. And then it's not too bad, you just can pull that pin out. But you can get it from various places. This one, I believe it or not, was actually Amazon. And it's even made in the US, which is kind of unusual. So it just looks like that. So, okay. I mean, a lot of places handle it. So Rob said Woodsmith handles it, and I'm sure Craft Supply wants you to part with some money to have it. But so you want me to keep going, finish it, or you want to stop? You tell me. You want to do a drawing? Okay. I can talk about this one on the end. People were curious. This one was pyro. This is cherry, and it was pyro carved, and then kind of a dry brush technique. So kind of going to go more for the final shape now. And I kind of change up the base every few years, just make it different every now and then. So back to the Badan. Badan gets a little grabby when the diameter gets small on the trunk, so I'm going to switch to an 1/8 inch wide parting tool. Shape the base a little bit here. And put a really slight taper on it to the bottom. Sometimes you just have to trust your eye what you like for proportion and that. Our Cedar Rapids Club had Dick sing the other night, and it was just fun to listen to all his stories. The cat does not like this part. We're going to use the chatter tool on the base here. Cover your ears. All right. There we go. I'm going to put a little decoration on the base. This is a beading tool, but I'm not going to use it for beads. I'm just going to use it for even space lines. This one is a D-way. I'm going to go back to the Sorby, but I'm going to use it in a different orientation. I'm just going to go straight in. And hopefully I'll get kind of a basket illusion. And you need to undercut the base so it'll stand. And I'll put a little more color on it. Slow the lathe down when you're using the colors. These nibs aren't as picky as some, but some of them you can actually just meld them. So when I have kids color stuff, I give them my cheap markers. I don't, it's not really a hard, fast rule, but any little thing I make with color, I like to leave the wood show somewhere. I made a lot of pendants for cat, and people didn't believe they were made out of wood, so I left the back so she could show them. So we're going to go with the carnauba again. This was something I learned in that Jimmy Clues class, is if I part off with that tool, I'm going in at an angle with the undercut, I'm going to have a nub on the end. Well, this is sharpened at a point like this at an angle, so this point is going to lead to the center. But the only thing is, you have this edge right here, and if you tilt that a little bit, it's very scary. But anyway, that just eliminates the nub under there. So that's a tree. And thank you. If I have some left over here, I can put a dowel in it and make a top out of this piece here. So